Today, we become legends.
Hey, my name's Inter and welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing an aspects tier list. Of course, these are released with the open beta patch just yesterday, and they're a ton of fun to play with. Basically, we're going to have two different tier lists because we're going to be ranking them based on design and how fun they are, and we're also going to be ranking them based on balance and how strong they are. And combining those into one tier list kind of makes some weird things because some might be incredibly viable but really boring, and some might be incredibly fun but incredibly unviable. So I thought we'd make two separate tier lists as we go through here and place them on both, you know, based on viability and based on how fun they are. So this left one will be the how fun they are, and the right one will be how viable they are, how strong they are. We've got 20 gods with aspects in the game at the moment, of course. Not every god has an aspect just yet, but their plan is for every god to have at least one aspect, maybe even multiple if some characters do well with them. And if you're a little bit out of the loop, aspects are basically a way to change a character's playstyle or role in a certain way. It will change their abilities to do something slightly different, and it will generally be a bit of a trade-off kind of thing with these. So you will gain some kind of powerful effect on maybe one of your abilities and then lose some kind of effect on one of your other abilities, or sometimes within the same ability. And of course, we got Smite 2 open in the background to explain all of these aspects as we go through if you're not up to date on exactly what they all do. But first up, we have Anhur, which if we go into Smite 2 here, you can see Anhur's aspect is the aspect of pride, which is enfeeble no longer debuffs enemies, which is the prot shred that he gets from hitting enemies with spear attacks, but dealing damage to the same enemy god with basic attacks provides you up to 100% bonus attack speed. This is 25% per attack, up to 4 stacks. And in terms of design, I think this is a D tier aspect. I don't think this is very well designed at all, to be honest. I think it's pretty boring, and it also doesn't really change his playstyle whatsoever, and it's going to fall into that trap of like an aspect that doesn't change their playstyle or role enough, so that like everyone will just build or play with the aspect or with the base kit, depending on which one is stronger. Like, there's not really much reason to go like Anhur's specific aspect if you're trying to go for this certain playstyle. It will just be, you know, Anhur aspect is better. Okay, I'm never going to use the base kit anymore, or the other way around. So I think in terms of design, Anhur's aspect is pretty bad. In terms of balance, though, I think it is quite good. I think I'll maybe throw it to at least a B tier. We'll see. Maybe we'll move some around as we place other ones, but I think Anhur's aspect is relatively strong. I do think it's probably better than the base kit, especially good for 1v1ing. Obviously going to be insane in duel, but I'm going to be mainly talking about conquest for this tier list. But even in conquest, it is still really good. You know, if you're just autoing down the enemy ADC in lane or whatever, or trying to focus down the CC target in team fights. Attack speed is uncapped in Smite 2 as well, so even if you're already up at like 2.2 attack speed with your base build, and you get an extra 100% from this, you will go up to 3.2. You won't cap out at 2.5, so that also helps out a lot. But moving on, next up we have Athena, which if we go to her in game here to explain, Athena's aspect essentially turns her ultimate into hitting enemies instead of allies. This is visible enemies only. You can't just you know, press your ultimate and see where everyone is on the map. Obviously, it's only going to be visible enemies, so make sure you ward up or like be teleporting to people that are already in a fight. And of course, there is a downside already there. You can't ult to allies and give them a health shield, but there's also another downside to this one, which is it deals no landing damage, but it does cause the enemy to take increased damage while Athena is channeling. And so in terms of design, I think this is an A tier design in my opinion. I really do like this one. It kind of pushes Athena a little bit more into like a solo or jungle, or maybe even a mid play style for Athena, where she's playing a little bit more damage heavy, a little bit more like solo, as opposed to playing support and like ulting to her teammates and stuff like that. I think it's really good. You know, if you have the 1v1 potential, which Athena with damage does have very high 1v1 potential, you know, 3 into reach, into 2 into reach does a lot of damage. Reach scales pretty insanely hard in Smite 2. It's definitely different to Smite 1 in that regard. So she definitely has a lot of 1v1 potential even without her ultimate. So if you can just catch someone like clearing a minion wave in a side lane, you get vision of them, you ult to them, and it's pretty much a free kill. Because Athena with damage can 1v1 a lot of characters. Not every character, obviously, but I do like the design overall. I think it's really good. In terms of balance, though, it's D tier. This aspect is absolutely awful. Even if it did damage, it would probably just be decent. I don't think it would be super broken, even if it did the regular damage of the ability. It will probably be pretty strong because it is, you know, pretty much unmissable unless they Aegis or whatever. But the fact that you lose all of the damage and the health shield that you would normally be giving to allies and the potential to go to allies and save them just for this benefit isn't really that good. Because a lot of the time with this aspect, you're going to be wanting to kind of go to people and solo them, and losing out on all the damage in that regard kind of sucks. Yes, you can probably still 1v1 with a base kit a lot of the time, even against an enemy with an ultimate. She does a lot of damage, but a lot of the time you're going to be wanting to go to someone who's isolated and solo them. That's the whole idea of this aspect. But like, because if you were going to go to an enemy that was already fighting an ally, why would you be using the aspect in the first place? You would just not use the aspects and provide the ally a health shield and deal big damage when you land. So like, it does kind of feel just terrible. I don't think there's much reason to use this aspect at all, to be honest. I think even if you're using Athena in like jungle or mid or solo, you still just go the regular kit in my opinion. I think it's pretty bad. Moving on though, we have have Bacchus up next, who is a pretty interesting aspect. So for Bacchus, it is the aspect of Revelry, which is after using Chug, your in-hand attacks cleave and deal bonus damage scaling with strength instead of protections for a short duration. So you get a pretty substantial amount of extra strength scaling on these. I think it's like an extra 25-30% strength scaling or something, and they're obviously AoE as well. And all that you really lose for this aspect is losing the big protection scaling slap on Chug, but that's been nerfed so much that it's honestly not even that powerful anymore. You know, if this was released Bacchus where the Chug in-hand was scaling with a ridiculous amount of procs, you'd be losing a bit more for this. But honestly, you don't really lose too much for this. So in terms of design, I think I'll give it like, I don't know, maybe a B. B is probably being generous. B or C for this in my opinion. I don't think it's like that inspiring really. It just gives him cleave auto attacks, makes him a little bit more viable outside of support. That's pretty much it. It's not super exciting. And in terms of power level though, I think I will throw it to the B tier. I think it is pretty good. It's really good for solo lane Bacchus. You probably don't want it on support. You might not even want it in solo necessarily, but you probably do for the AoE auto attacks. Definitely will help out a lot with your lane clear, and in jungle this is going to be really good as well. Not that jungle Bacchus is particularly viable anyway, but if you want to build like a little bit more strength heavy, Bacchus does have decent strength scaling. You can kind of go that route and you have these kind of chunking auto attacks that are really good for clear in the jungle, but overall I don't think it's super strong. Moving on to Bellona though, let's get her aspect up. So this one essentially trades out the final slam damage on bludgeon, but whenever you gain block stacks with sword and shield or healing from Scourge with your weapons, nearby allied gods also gain the benefits. So in terms of design, I think this one's a bit boring. I'll probably throw it to the C tier. It's not quite as boring as Anhur's. It does change her playstyle, I guess, a tiny bit. You know, if you want to play Bellona support, you're probably using this aspect. Not that Bellona support is particularly viable anyway. But it's okay. It's a little bit uninspired though. You know, it doesn't really change her too much, honestly. And then in terms of balance, I think this is probably like B again, I guess. It's just fine. Like, I think it's probably better than base Bellona in a lot of ways, just because the spin like bonus damage that you get on the final slam for bludgeon isn't that big of a downside to lose that. I think it's like 25% per target you hit, so you know, in just solo lane laning phase you're only losing 25% damage on the slam for this benefit. Obviously you're not gaining anything in the solo lane laning phase either, but you're going to be getting that more so late game. And late game you're not exactly, you know, slamming people with bludgeon if you're a tank build anyway, so I think this is a pretty decent aspect. I think you will use it a lot of the time, but overall not anything too crazy. Next up is Cernunnos though. Speaking of crazy, Cernunnos is probably one of the craziest aspects that we have in the game at the moment. So this is the aspect of Strife. Your basic attacks no longer fire projectiles, they straight up become melee, but they deal increased damage, they cleave, and they apply Shifter of Seasons to all enemies hit, and also Horn Charge's cooldown is reduced by, I believe, 4 seconds when you hit an enemy god with it, so you can kind of dash more aggressively. So in terms of design, this is S tier. I absolutely love this one. I think it's just a really great idea that, you know, turning ranged god into a melee god, and probably at some point we will have one that turns a melee god into a ranged god as well. I think that only makes sense. You don't want every aspect to just be this. You don't want every single melee god becoming a ranged god with their aspect, but I think a handful of these sprinkled into the aspect pool is a really good idea for gods that it kind of makes sense for. Cernunnos has already, you know, in history tried to be made viable in like jungle or as a bruiser or whatever, and that's kind of what this aspect does, and I think it's just super interesting. In terms of balance though, I think it's D tier. I think this aspect is absolute hot garbage. I'm willing to die on this hill. I've seen some people claiming that it's actually going to be like super broken and whatnot, but it's just such a big downside to lose your ranged autos on Cern. It basically changes him into a completely different character, and while it is a ton of fun, I don't think it's going to be particularly very good. Next up is Chaac though, who's basically got a very simple aspect. It just turns Rain Dance into damage instead of healing. That's literally all it does. It's a very simple one. So Rain Dance no longer heals, but damages enemies in the area instead. And of course, you can stack this if you want. You know, you can put down your axe and then press Rain Dance, and you get the rain around you and the rain in the giant circle, and you can stack up double damage with it. It does hit pretty hard. I think in terms of design, this is like a solid A tier aspect in my opinion. It's very simple, but it also does change the way Chaac plays substantially. You know, you might end up leveling the 3 in laning phase or whatever to be able to clear the wave, because it does do a lot of damage. It makes him a lot more viable in mid, maybe even in jungle. It really changes the way Chaac plays a lot. It's a simple line of text, but it does change a lot for him. Losing that heal is a really big deal in terms of your playstyle. You might not want this in solo just because you lose the heal, which is super powerful for Chaac. In terms of balance, I think it's pretty bad though. I'm going to throw it to the C tier. I don't think Chaac's aspect is going to be super good, to be honest. Yes, it does a lot of damage, but it's also a lot of the exact opposite. It's a lot of avoidable damage that people can easily jump out of, blink out of, even just walk out of. Yes, the slow is strong, but you're probably not going to keep them in that area without some follow-up CC for the entire duration. So while it is a lot of total damage, it's going to be hard to keep them in that area consistently. Mainly talking about the axe here, the rain on yourself, you can do a lot, but if you're just using the self-rain damage, it's not as much. You kind of want to be getting the double stacking where you have them in the axe rain area and and your own reign. And it's just going to be kind of hard to do that, and it's a really, really titanic downside that losing the healing provides for this. Chaac is very reliant on that healing, and it's one of the strongest self-heals in the game overall, so losing that is a really big deal. Next up, we have Cupid, though, who has a very interesting aspect. So this one is aimed at turning Cupid into more of a support. So heart bomb's damage is decreased, but the enemy hit has reduced attack speed, and the explosion area heals allies, and if you have a passive stack, it also grants a health shield to the allies as well. So design-wise, I think this one's really interesting. I think I'm going to throw it to the A tier again. I think, you know, already with the rework that they did with Cupid coming into Smite 2, they're trying to push him more into like a supportive healer role, and this aspect just pushes him even further in that direction. You know, if you're going support Cupid, you are going this aspect 100%. I do think it's a lot of fun. You know, the hunter supports have historically never been super viable, but Cupid is really trying to be pushed in that direction. I think it's super interesting. In terms of power level, though, I think I'll throw it to the C tier. I don't think it's going to be super good, purely because Cupid support isn't good. I think the aspect in itself, if Cupid was a viable meta support, this will be much higher, because I think the aspect, what it does inherently is really good. The extra healing and shielding is super good, and you don't really have that big of a downside. You know, losing a bit of damage on Heart Bomb isn't a big deal if you were playing Cupid full tank or whatever. But yeah, the main reason it's in C tier is that Cupid support is just kind of unviable. It's not really something that is going to work particularly well in like any mid to high level play of Conquest. Maybe in other modes, you know, maybe in Joust, maybe in Assault and stuff like that, it is a lot better, but in Conquest, I don't think it's super viable. Next up, though, we have Danzaburou, who once again has another interesting aspect. I'm going to keep saying this because a lot of them are very interesting. So, aspect of Fellowship, Alluring Spirits, the 2 no longer throws out the sake bottle, but instead spawns 2 clones. And also, all of your clones deal more damage and take less damage. So yeah, basically, you're going to still get the heal from your 2, but you're not going to get the jar that goes out, deals damage, and taunts people. That ability, or that portion of the ability, is completely deleted. But instead, you will instantly spawn 2 clones, which is, you know, potentially really powerful depending on your build. If you got like an Aerospore build or anything that procs on basic attacks, those do proc on the clones at full value at the moment. That might get changed in the future where they proc at like half value or whatever. But at the moment, clones proc items for full value, basic attack items. So being able to instantly spawn 2 without relying on that chance based on your int in your 3 or whatnot, it can be really powerful, and all of your clones dealing more and taking less damage can be really good as well. In terms of design, I love this one. I'm going to throw it probably up to the A tier. That's Bacchus. Give me Danza. There we go. Yeah, we'll probably throw it to the A tier, I think, in terms of overall design, because I do like the clone aspect. I think it's really cool. It just causes so much absolute carnage and really allows you to make some wacky builds with like proc on hit effects that I was mentioning earlier and stuff. I think it's super interesting. So design, I like this one. In terms of balance, though, I think it's probably not great, purely because playing around Danza's clones is already not great. If they buff his clones in some way, like inherent within the base kit, where the clones are more useful or more reliable, I think this could get a lot better, but at the moment, just like playing clone Danzaburou isn't really particularly very good, so going even more in that direction probably isn't going to fix that. And the downside of losing basically Danzaburou's only impactful CC, other than his ultimate, is kind of a really big downside. You know, that jar is one of the better abilities in the game, honestly, because it has an ODR on it, a taunt is super powerful, does a lot of damage as well. So it's a really, really big downside for an upside that is kind of inconsistent. So overall, I don't think it's going to be super good as an aspect, but I love the design. Next up is Fenrir. So Fenrir's is a supportive aspect aiming at bringing more into the support role. Historically, has been very valuable there. So Brutalize deals less damage but applies a stacking slow, and Seething Hell's buff effects are decreased but apply to all allies in an area around him. So design-wise, I think I'll give this a B. I do like it. I think it's verging on being an A tier, honestly. I think it's a pretty good, like, simple way of making Fenrir more viable in the support role. It's nothing too crazy. It's not going to massively change his playstyle or anything, but if you are playing him in support, maybe even in solo with a tank builder, you probably do want this. I played against this a couple of times, and the slow on his 3 is really noticeable. It's as if he has a Frostbound hammer like procking on you when he's doing that, or like a Gem of Isolation or whatever. It definitely does make a big impact, the slow on the 3, bigger than I thought it would, and then Seething Hell being able to buff all allies in the area is super good for like objective shred and sieges and just team fight in general. Which, speaking of the balance, I do think this is really good. I'm going to throw it to the A tier. I think Fenrir's aspect, you don't go in jungle, obviously. I mean, you could, honestly. If you're going like a little bit more of a bruiser build in jungle, you probably could do that. Just because the brutalize slow is super important. That's actually really good. Losing the bit of the self buff is kind of like sad, but still you're going to be able to provide that to like your mid lane or on 2v2 fights, and in late game team fights it's just going to be objectively better. So honestly, yeah, I've kind of talked myself into this. I think you go this on Fenrir jungle as well, especially if you're going a little bit of bruiser, which you typically do on Fenrir jungle. But yeah, in solo lane and support, you definitely go this. I think it's really strong overall. Next up is Geb's aspect. So Geb is new in open beta. He's coming in with an immediate aspect, and this one is pretty interesting. So Shockwave no longer knocks up enemy gods, which is the 2, but it deals full damage in a circle around you, and the cooldown is decreased for every enemy it hits. So this includes minions, so if you're hitting a full wave of 6 minions, I believe it's 0.5 seconds off each time. So hitting a full wave of 6 minions is already 3 seconds flat off of the cooldown, which if you have a lot of cooldown rate, you know, that scales better. If your base cooldown's 10 seconds, 3 seconds off of it isn't a big deal, but if your base cooldown's 6 seconds, it's half off of the cooldown kind of thing. In terms of design, I do like this. I think it's a lot of fun. I'm going to throw it to the B tier, probably similar to Fenrir's. You know, it's nothing too crazy. It doesn't massively change the way Geb plays or anything, but it is interesting. It's an interesting little swap where he plays a little bit differently. In terms of balance, though, I think this is D tier. I don't think there's any real reason to go this, honestly, just because losing a knock-up is like one of the most powerful CCs in the game. Losing that is just so bad, and it also like kind of interrupts a lot of Geb's combos. Like a lot of the reason Geb is so deadly is that he can ult into 2 and keep your CC chain for a substantial amount of time, and in Smite 2 with the rollout knock-up, you can roll out, jump on them, knock up, instant knock up, and you can do that as well. Whereas losing the knock-up to play Aspect Geb, it just really hurts your CC chains, which is a lot of the reason why Geb is so deadly. I do think it can be powerful. It's really good for like a solo or mid-lane laning phase, for example. It makes your clear insanely strong compared to how it would be before, but like for late-game team fights, it's just so ass garbage. It's like actually awful for late-game team fights compared to having the knock-up. And obviously, laning phase is important, but generally like team fights are more important. Moving on though, we have Hecate up next, which is another super interesting aspect, man. They're hitting on a lot of these. So Aspect of Ruin. Spell Eater, which is her 2, can no longer be refired, but instead reduces enemy ability damage in the area, and every time an enemy casts an ability in the area, a projectile lands and explodes at their location, doing damage. So this one is super interesting. I think I'm going to throw this one to the S tier. It harkens back to like old Nox design, you know, being like a bit of an anti-mage, like if you're going to cast abilities near me, you're going to suffer for it kind of design, which I think is super interesting design space, and really fitting for Hecate in my opinion as well, like lore-wise. So yeah, design-wise, I think this is super sick. There's a good trade-off for it as well. In terms of balance, I think it's also S tier. This aspect is super, super broken, man. It makes Hecate support viable pretty much on its own. Just being able to reduce enemy damage output like in a massive area in a team fight, it makes Hecate herself pretty much unkillable. She just runs around inside this area and takes almost no damage. It's kind of silly because she's already super safe with like the amount of movement speed she gets, the magic shield that she gets, her ultimate for just getting her out of places. She has a mez on the one. Like she's already really hard to kill, and with this aspect she becomes pretty much unkillable with a tank build. But also in team fights, this is super powerful. You know, you just put this up around a fire giant or on a siege or something, and the enemy are just straight up doing, I think it's 15% less damage with all of their abilities. That cannot be understated. Like that is such a powerful effect for such a massive area. And you don't even lose that much damage. You do lose the immediate burst. Like if you were going a full intelligence Hecate mid, I don't think you go this aspect, but you do lose that immediate burst, but you still get a decent amount of damage and also a lot of item procs from this. You know, if you put this up on a siege or a fire giant fight and like 8 abilities go off, you're getting 8 of those meteors running down, and that will proc, you know, Soul Reaver or Glad Shield or Phoenix Shield or whatever you've got in your build like multiple times, and that can be really good as well. Like this aspect is just completely broken and also really good design wise in my opinion. Next up is Hercules though, which is a bit of a fall off from Hecate's, I won't lie. Hercules aspect is pretty boring and also not particularly good. Spoilers. So aspect of preservation, mitigate wounds is 3, no longer heals based on damage taken or provides attack speed. Instead you gain a stack whenever you or a nearby allied god takes damage from basic attacks, and when it ends, stacks are expended to heal all nearby allied gods. So design wise, this one's pretty boring in my opinion. I think I'll throw it to the C tier. I don't think it's quite as boring as Anhur's. It does change its playstyle a little bit, obviously aiming at a more supportive Herc rather than like a solo lane bruiser Herc or a jungle Herc. And then balance wise, I think this is complete ass. Maybe it's not quite as bad as these D tier ones actually. These actively make the character worse. I don't think Hercules aspect actively makes him worse. It just doesn't really make him any better, to be honest. I don't think there's much reason to go this aspect from solo or jungle. I guess if you're playing support, you probably do go this aspect, but I don't think it's particularly powerful. Like, I don't think it's going to be much stronger than just going regular Hercules in support, to be honest. It's reliant on basic attacks, so against like super heavy basic attack teams, if they have like, you know, double hunter or whatever, or something like that, or like Nemesis hunter, it can be a little bit better. But you are losing something pretty powerful for this effect. You're losing the attack speed, you're losing the massive burst heal that like really keeps Hercules alive, so overall I don't think it's going to be super strong. Moving on though, next up we have Khepri, who is another pretty interesting aspect. This is the laceration aspect. Abduct no longer pulls enemy gods, but roots them in place in front of you instead, dealing constant basic attack damage for the duration. So design-wise, I think this is fine. I think I'll put it in the mid-tier, to be honest, in the B-tier. I think it's an okay design-wise. Like, what do you really do with Khepri with an aspect is the problem. You know, he's a very singularly focused character that is just a support that plays super peel-oriented, and it's kind of hard to make him different in that regard, but there's a lot more you could do with this, but it's not, like, a terrible design, in my opinion. And it doesn't really fall into the same trap as something like the Anhur one, where it's the same playstyle. It's definitely a different playstyle. Balance-wise, I think I'll throw it to the B tier because I think it's okay. The downside of this is really kind of non-existent is the main thing. Like, I don't think the upside is particularly good either because I don't think going like full damage auto-attack proc Khepri is going to ever be good. And if you're going full tank Khepri from support, the basic attack damage that this does is going to be pretty irrelevant, but also the downside is pretty irrelevant. Like, that pull is often not like super powerful on Khepri anyway, and rooting them will often cause them to take the same amount of damage anyway. It is a small downside, but it's really not anything too big, but the upside is also not that big in my opinion. So overall, I think, you know, you could go the aspect or you could not go the aspect. I don't think it changes too much. So balance-wise, I think it's pretty okay. Next up is Loki, which is a pretty crazy one. So Loki's aspect, concealment, vanish no longer debuffs enemies you hit, but instead stealths you and the nearest allied god instead of just you. So the debuff on vanish, for those that aren't aware, is the damage. You apply a debuff to them, which ticks 4 times and deals the damage. So you're losing the entire damage on Loki's one to be able to get this effect. And design-wise, I think it's okay. I think basically the one problem with this, I do like the idea of it. I think it's a super fun aspect. But the one problem is, like, it's just going to require a lot of team communication. You know, if you've got a duo queue partner and you're playing, like, you know, Loki in solo or whatever, and you want to conceal your jungler and go into the backline with communication, it's going to be really good. But in just random solo queue lobbies, it's going to be insanely hard to get your teammates to actually coordinate and use this super effectively. That's like the one design problem with it. And in terms of balance, I also think it's going to be pretty ass garbage, to be honest. I think I might throw it to the D tier. Yes, this can be really powerful if you have communication, which I guess maybe I'll throw it to the C tier for that reason, because it can be good. Whereas I think these aspects down here are just objectively bad and they will just make the character worse. You can make some plays with this, especially if you have a duo queue partner or someone that's really good at the game that you know is going to be able to reliably use that invisibility really effectively. But just losing the damage is so bad, and like Loki support is never going to be good, and you don't want to go this aspect in jungle or solo because you lose way too much damage for doing that. And in the context of solo builds, you also lose an item proc because the one's no longer going to deal damage, so you're not going to get any like Shield of the Phoenix or Glad Shield procs or anything off of that, or Bluestone. Like, you're just losing so much for this, and I don't think it's going to be super good. Yes, you could go in support, and you don't really care about losing the damage, but is Loki support ever going to be viable? I don't think so. Next up is Mordred, though, which we are jumping between viabilities here, because Mordred aspect is insanely strong. So this is the aspect of Rage. Shoulder Charge, which is your interact passive dash, no longer knocks up enemy gods and deals reduced damage, but now passes through enemy gods. Additionally, damaging an enemy god with an ability resets the cooldown. So this one, I think, goes straight to S tier in design and balance. I think this is going to be insanely strong, and I also think it's insanely fun. The one problem I do have with this aspect is that it doesn't change Mordred's playstyle all too much, kind of similar to Anhur, and it will just be that Mordred aspect is just better than base Mordred. I don't think there's any reason to ever play base Mordred again, which is the one problem with this one. I don't think it's a big enough problem to demote it to A tier because it's so much fun. I absolutely love playing with this aspect, so I think I'm still going to put it in S. But yeah, I do think in terms of the design philosophy of aspects being that it's going to be a playstyle shift and that both are viable, I don't think both are going to be viable with Mordred. Like, I think there's no reason to ever go base Mordred anymore. You just go aspect Mordred, which makes me think maybe this should be Mordred's base kit and then the aspect could be something different that actually like playstyle shifts him a little bit. But yeah, other than that, it's so much fun. It makes Mordred infinitely more fun playing with this aspect. It's super good. And then balance wise, it is also insanely broken. This procs item effects, which maybe it shouldn't, or maybe should proc at reduced value. But I don't think they have the tech in the game to proc items at reduced value at the moment. But once they do add that in, which they probably will, you know, maybe shoulder charge only procs items at 50% value and that's a bit more balanced. But at the moment, it's just super good. It gives you an insane amount of mobility. It gives you basically double item procs because every time you use an ability, you're also using your shoulder charge. So it essentially gives you double item procs, which as we've seen historically from stuff like Erlang Shen's original design, where his dog was proccing item effects, double item procs is an insanely valuable effect. And that's basically what this does, as well as giving you a shitload of extra mobility. And all you lose is like a tiny knock up on the dash. That's not a big deal. Next up though, we have Neith, which is a less interesting aspect in my opinion, but still could have some viability. So Neith's aspect basically turns her into an auto attack hunter instead of an ability hunter. So broken weave explosions no longer root enemies and the buff has a reduced duration. However, the attack speed gained is much higher. Additionally, using World Weaver, her ultimate provides stacks of broken weave as well. So yeah, basically your one is no longer going to root enemies with the giant explosion, which definitely hurts ability-based Neith, and the buff is reduced duration, but you're going to get a shitload more attack speed from it. Design-wise, I think I'll throw this just straight to B. I think it's kind of fine. It's nothing too interesting overall. Like a lot of these ones in B, like they're not anything super crazy interesting, but they're also like they do impact the god a little bit. You know, this is definitely a significant playstyle shift for Neith, and if you are going to want to build her like ability-based from mid or something, you're definitely not going to go this aspect, and if you are playing her in ADC, you might want to go this aspect, so it does change her a little bit, which is why it's in B. In terms of balance, I don't even know with this one, to be honest. I've not really seen anyone use it. I think I'm going to throw it to B because I think it could be good, especially because auto attack hunter builds are much better than ability hunter builds at the moment. Like Neith's ability build got nerfed pretty heavily, like double stacking got nerfed, cosmic horror got got nerfed, Reaver got nerfed. Like, a lot of the items in that build kind of got heavily nerfed. And a lot of Neith's ability scalings got nerfed as well. This was back when she was like one of the better gods in the game, like in the super early closed alphas, and she hasn't really been buffed up since then. So I think maybe allowing her to go a more standard attack speed build with something like Braggy's Harp Sunbeam, if that's still going to be good on this patch, which it might not be, but we'll see. Allowing her access to those kinds of builds that are probably going to be a little bit more powerful could be really good. So I think we'll throw it to the B tier. Next up, though, we have Nemesis, which is a pretty interesting one. So aspect of justice, divine judgment no longer does damage in the area, but instead averages your and the enemy god's current health as long as you have less. So this is a pretty crazy one. In terms of design, I think I'll give it like maybe an A. Yeah, I'll give it an A in terms of design. I think it is really interesting. You know, we don't really have anything like this in the game, honestly, where it's like a super hard, like, I'm going to turn this fight. I guess we now have Fire Giant's Obsidian Dagger, which does a very similar thing. But yeah, if you just get down to like 5-10% health and then a full health tank, you're going to absolutely delete a lot of their health bar and heal yourself back up to full. Oh, not to full, sorry, or up to half. So you're going to take them down from full to half and up yourself to half. And that can be really powerful in terms of like a swing. But I think overall, this aspect's going to be pretty bad. There isn't that much of a downside to it, but it's also really hard to use the upside, honestly. Like, you've got to get super low and you might end up dying in the process. You know, if you get down to like 20 or 30% and you're waiting for that right moment to use your ult and then you get CC'd and you die, it's going to be like really sad. And it also means that you can't really use Nemesis ult to engage, or you're kind of losing the whole value of the aspect. You know, if you want to use Nemesis ult to engage, which is usually how she does engage a fight, you would just not use the aspect because then you would get the damage as well. If your aspect ulting at full health, it does nothing. So like, it kind of removes your ability to engage with the ult, which is kind of how Nemesis plays in general, and she'd feel kind of weird without that. So yeah, I think overall it's not going to be a super powerful aspect, but I like the design. I think it's interesting. Moving on to Ra, though, who has one of the crazier aspects in the game. So this is the aspect of thermotherapy. Solar Blessing and Searing Pain only deal base damage with no scaling. In return, Solar Blessing can be placed on allied gods attaching to them, and Searing Pain heals allies hit. So yeah, this is an absolutely crazy one. I think design-wise, this goes straight to S tier. I absolutely love this. Yeah, we've always wanted to Ra ult our allies to heal them, right? That's always been a fantasy of Smite players. I think it's super cool. Being able to attach his 3 to allies is also a nice idea. Balance-wise, I also think it's S tier. I think this is going to be a really, really powerful aspect. The downside is, like, kind of big if you're going mid lane Ra. Like, if you've got a lot of intelligence in your build, which intelligence builds are fucking nuts on the new patch, by the way. You can build, like, Rodder Tahuti and Dreamer's Idol in the same build and get a 45% imp boost. And that will stack with all of your imp potions that now stack with each other in the late game. Like, int-based mid builds are kind of insane. So if you're doing int-based Ra mid, you probably don't want the aspect, just because losing the scaling is going to be kind of sad. But if you're playing Ra support or Ra solo, you are 100% going this aspect, because the downside isn't overall that bad unless you have loads of int. Like, Ra still has decent base damage on the ult. I think the base damage is still like 800, and it also still deals 15% max health true damage. So you're not losing any of that. You're only losing the scaling damage. And being able to attach the 3 is also really valuable for team fights. You know, being able to heal your allies consistently rather than having them stand still in a single area. And just being able to re-aim the ult after you fired it. You know, it makes Ra's ult almost unmissable, whereas before it's actually quite a difficult ability to land. And it still does solid damage, as I said. You know, it still does like 800 base damage plus 15% max health true damage. It's still going to be hitting pretty hard, and you can also heal allies and heal Ra himself with it. When you hit an ally with the ult, you heal yourself as well. So it's really powerful. Speaking of really powerful, Thanatos is up next, who is also a really solid aspect. So this is the aspect of Reaping. Harvester of Souls no longer heals Thanatos, but provides permanent max health on kills. Additionally, Soul Reap deals bonus damage and heals Thanatos based on his max health. So I think this is another one that goes straight to S tier on both tier lists, in my opinion. Design-wise, I love it. It's really cool. It makes Thanatos into a tank. It makes him a lot more viable in the solo lane. It's really cool. You could even go this in jungle if you wanted to, if you had a little bit more of a bruiser build planned out for Thanatos. He does work okay with the bruiser build. You know, he's got an execute, he's got a lot of sustain. And then balance-wise, it's also insanely strong. You can get up to absolutely ridiculous health numbers with this. You know, if you want to go for a silly full health build with like Yogi's necklace, you can do that and hit like 5.5, 6k HP in the late game, which is kind of silly. But even if you don't go that and you go a more regular build, you just straight up have like 500 to 1,000 extra health by the time you get to team fight phase. It's just kind of ridiculous. And also your 3 becomes a super powerful healing ability, because it heals based on every single target hit. So if you're hitting like a full minion wave of 6, you're going to be healing a large percentage of your max health with Soul Reap. And overall, the downside isn't that bad. You know, it's a decent amount of healing that you lose, but Death Sight still heals you. The 3 heals you now. Like, you can definitely make up for that. So like, overall, his healing doesn't even go down very much, and he just gets a bunch of extra free max health. It's super strong. And finally, of course, because everything from Morrigan onwards doesn't have an aspect at the moment. They will be getting them at some point, but at the moment they don't. So Morrigan is our final aspect. Let's check it out in game. So this one's pretty simple. Confusion no longer stealths you, but on refire you swap positions with your club, which is kind of a crazy one. So design-wise, I like this. I think I'll throw it to the B tier. I don't think it's anything super crazy. It kind of just like turns her from like a stealth and run in to burst someone. You instead just teleport in and burst someone. It's not like a massive playstyle shift, really. But I do think it's interesting, you know, being able to kind of like fake people out with the clone. You know, you throw it and then everyone has to back up because you might just TP and one-shot someone immediately. I think it's a cool playstyle. And in terms of balance, I think I'll throw it to the 80. I think it's just straight up better than base Morrigan. I think you can do a lot more with this, you know, being able to just instantly TP and you can prepare your 1 before you throw the 3, or I guess after you throw the 3. And you can just keep faking people out, and then at some point they get tired of it and don't think you're going to TP in, and then you just instantly, with your 1 prepared, just TP in and one-shot one of the backliners and then transform it. It's going to be super good, I think. But yeah, there you go. That is my design and power level aspects tier list there. I thought doing this in 2 different tier lists would make more sense, just because some of these you can see are like pretty even in terms of that, like Hecate and Mordred I think are powerful and interesting. But then you have some like Cernunnos, for example, where I think Cernunnos is S tier in terms of design, but absolute D tier in terms of actual viability. But if we had a single tier list, like what do? Do I put it right in the middle? I don't really know. I thought it was better to do this as 2 tier lists. Well, hopefully this was interesting for you. That's my thoughts on all the aspects. So in general, I think most of them are pretty well designed. You know, anything above B tier, I think is a good design that doesn't really need too many changes. I think these 3 down here could maybe be reworked though. They are a little bit boring. And then in terms of balance, they're generally not great. Honestly, I think this tier list definitely does skew more towards not being great. But these 6 up here are definitely overall improvements. But yeah, what do you guys think down below? There's some that I rated. Like, do you really like Anhur's aspect? Do you really hate Hecate's aspect? Do you think Athena's is broken? Do you think Mordred's is trash? Let me know down below and I'll catch you guys for another one later on. Have a great day and peace out, you nerds.